The sun dipped low over the crowded square, casting long shadows that knotted together with the weight of whispered accusations and furious shouts. Vera stood at the heart of it all, her pulse pounding against the ribs that felt suddenly too tight. Dozens, no, hundreds, of eyes were upon her, sharp and accusing, like daggers, piercing her fragile shield of defiance. The plaza stretched before her, a swirling mosaic of onlookers who watched her with a mixture of contempt, curiosity, and cold betrayal. The wooden cart where she'd been dragged earlier creaked ominously under the jeers that still echoed in her ears. Traitor! The word thundered across the square, a hurled spear that embedded itself into her chest. It was her clan's voice, the very people she'd once called family. Even from this distance, Vera could see the horror and disbelief etched into the faces of some, as if they couldn't reconcile the woman standing there, her long chestnut hair, tangled and dull, her green eyes flashing with silent fury, with the traitor they claimed she was. She tasted blood behind her clenched teeth, a sharp metallic tang that wasn't hers. Her slender figure trembled beneath the ragged cloak that barely shielded her from the biting wind. Above her left eyebrow, the faint scar she'd earned in training pulsed a stubborn reminder of battles fought, not given up. Enough! The voice rang out sharply, authoritative and cold. At once, the murmurs smothered into uneasy silence as a man stepped forward, a dark figure with silver-streaked hair that caught the sunlight like frost on black velvet. Kalen, the Alpha King. His piercing, ice-blue eyes scanned the assembly, but never wavered from Vera. The crowd parted instinctively, whispers dying into the heavy air as he approached. He was broad, muscular, the jagged scar across his left cheekbone adding gravitas to his ruthless air. In that moment, king or no, he was a force. Imposing, inscrutable, completely. His expression was a mask, but beneath it, a flicker of something unexpected lurked. Interest, perhaps, or something deeper, more dangerous. "You know why she is here," Kalen said, his voice low and commanding. "She betrayed her own people. This is not a land for traitors." There was no mercy in his words, only cold finality. Vera lifted her chin, fighting back the tremor that threatened to pull her under. "I did nothing but follow my conscience," she said, voice steady, despite the knot of despair twisting in her gut. "You're all blinded by fear." A cruel laugh sliced through the tension. "Conscience?" A bitter voice from the front hissed. "Her kind brings ruin. We saw the messages she sent, the secrets she whispered to our enemies." "Lies," Vera spat, but the muttering crowd would not be swayed, even as she reached for proof. For some fragment of hope, the consensus had already been molded. A mock trial, forced testimonies, and now this cruel spectacle that tore her apart. "Banish her," the town elder declared, voice resonating above the din. "Let the borderlands be her tomb." They dragged Vera forward without another word. She felt the stony ground beneath her shift, the air grow colder as they crossed the invisible line into the borderlands, wild, ungoverned, a territory whispered about in fearful legends. The wind bit her face, lashing icy fingers across her bare skin as the sun vanished behind a knife-edge horizon. Her body screamed with exhaustion. The moment she stumbled, muscles trembling as hunger clawed at her belly. The chills seeped into her bones, and the sky above darkened to bruised purple. She collapsed near a cluster of jagged rocks, the night swallowing her whole. Unseen eyes watched her. From the shadows, a massive shape emerged, a creature born of myth and moonlight. Kalen's beast, the alpha wolf. The dark sentinel whose presence marked the depths of the king's dominion. Its fur was a cascade of silver and sable, muscles coiled like thunder about to break. It sniffed the air, nostrils flaring as it caught her scent, a fragile thread of life against the vast wilderness. The beast's amber eyes glinted with something that hovered between suspicion and curiosity. She was marked by exile. She was vulnerable. But something in the air drew the wolf closer, each step deliberate and silent, until her scent filled its senses completely. Vera's throat tightened as she sensed the intrusion. She dared not move. Too weak, too wary. Yet beneath the beast's silent watch, a strange thread wound itself between them, fragile and unspoken. The wild kinship of the Forsaken. Days. Days later, the harsh stone walls of Kaelin's fortress rose like a jagged crown against the grey sky. Vera's body still ached, but her mind sharpened through the haze of adrenaline and lingering dread. They'd dragged her inside with a leash of chains that bit into her wrist, binding more than flesh. It shackled her spirit too. The Alpha King's domain was a cold throne carved of stone and shadows. Within these walls the wolves prowled in silence, silent sentinels whose amber eyes flickered in the dim light like embers in a dying fire. They watched her, as if deciphering a puzzle only they could understand. Kaelin himself remained distant, an enigma who hung like a shadow on the periphery of her existence. His presence was immense, but he spoke little, his voice a rare chord of gravel and ice when it came. He assigned her menial tasks, sweeping cold corridors, slick with damp moss, tending fires that clawed weakly at the chill, fetching water from the well that echoed with silence. Vera learned to move, without drawing notice, to make herself smaller than the eyes that followed her every step. She was the exile, the spy who had become a prisoner, not by her will, but by fate's cruel design. Still, every evening, beneath the veil of darkness and the steady rhythm of silence, Vera began to leave small offerings outside Kaelin's door. Simple things: dried meat wrapped in cloth, berries picked from thorny bushes, a cup of water drawn from the clearest spring. At first, she hoped only to appease the mystery of the man who ruled this land, but something in her heart whispered that kindness might be the only currency left to trade inside the fortress. The wolves grew restless. Their golden eyes shimmered with an unnatural alertness whenever she passed. The Alpha's beast, the same that had tracked her to the borderlands, watched with a gaze that burned beneath her skin, stirring a wild unease, yet mirroring a desperate hope. Vera wondered, in the quiet moments when the fortress walls seemed to breathe around her, what Kaelin truly saw in her. Was she merely a pawn in a dangerous game? A trespasser destined for ruin? Or was there a glimmer beneath his cold exterior that recognized the storm within her? One night, as the bitter wind howled like a mourning wolf beyond the stone battlements, she heard the softest shuffle at the door. Her breath caught, heart pulsing, a frantic rhythm. The exchange was wordless, a small nod, barely perceptible through the slit of the door. The discarded scraps of food vanished, taken into the shadows. The beast was watching. And within those burning eyes, Vera saw not judgment or wrath, but something infinitely more profound. A silent promise to seek, to guard, and perhaps to understand. The fragile thread stretched taut between exile and kingdom, a tenuous bridge forged not by words, but by shared solitude, the beginning of a bond neither dared yet to name. And somewhere, deep within the fortress, behind eyes that feared no enemy, a king's cold heart began to thaw before a woman who left food outside his door every night. The days that followed the silent exchange at the door were fragile attempts at forging something neither Vera nor the pack had dared to imagine before. The fortress exhaled its cold breath on her skin. Dark stone walls looming like silent sentinels, but within its shadowed chambers, a subtle shift took root. Vera found herself no longer just the trespasser or the spy lurking at the edges of a hostile land. She was becoming, slowly, inexplicably, part of something. And the pack watched her, their sharp gazes, cautious, measuring, but not yet condemning. It began with small acts, almost invisible to the hurried eyes of soldiers busied with war preparations and the roiling turmoil that nipped at the fortress gates. Vera moved quietly among them, hands deft and sure. She found the torn harnesses of the younger wolves, leather frayed beneath their claws. She patched them with strips cut from her own worn sash. She fetched clean cloths and salves from the infirmary, tending scrapes and bruises on the pups that scrambled over the stones with wild, hopeful energy. Where others saw only combatants and pawns, souls hardened by survival, she saw the pulsing life beneath fur and scars. "You shouldn't waste your time," one of the lieutenants growled low enough for her to hear. "We don't need charity. We need strength." His eyes flicked to her, suspicion sharp as knives. Yet Vera said nothing, only smiled faintly and pressed the bandages tighter, her fingers moving with quiet purpose. Strength wasn't only measured in muscle and teeth. Sometimes it grew in the gentlest touch. Word passed slowly through the ranks, carried on whispered notes, and exchanged glances. The pack began to notice the new softness in the beast's eyes, the way restless pups settled under her calm presence. When a snarling squabble erupted near the training grounds, Vera intervened, not with commands, but a lowered voice and outstretched hands. Her gestures, subtle, the tilt of the head, a steadying breath, caught and shared. The growls faded, replaced by tentative nudges and careful licks. Even the alpha's beast, fierce and eternal, blinked slower when she brushed her fingers along the coarse fur at his muzzle, soothing like the dawn's first light against frozen earth. Kalen watched these moments from a distance, his ice blue gaze narrowing, not in accusation, but with a measured wariness he did not yet voice. There was something in the way her movements carried calm, a power buried beyond blood and bone, that softened the taut muscles in his shoulders. His formidable beast, ever vigilant, did not retreat when she approached. Instead, it lingered close, growling silently at all others, but yielding its space to her touch, as if recognizing kinship across worlds. Yet the pack's silence was wary, not kind. Respect was a fragile thing here, earned in blood or fire, and Vera felt that weight in every glance that flicked toward her from shadowed corners. Still, the isolation inside the walls loosened its grip, and for the first time in many months, she breathed with less restraint, carried less weight. The fortress, with all its cold stones and hard truths, began to feel less like a prison. One grey morning, the air heavy with the looming scent of rain, Vera found Keelan standing at the edge of the training yard, watching a cluster of pups attempt to learn the dance of the hunt. Their wild, clumsy movements, the eagerness in their eyes, it was a brief glimpse of something pure amid the relentless grind of power and war. She approached quietly, unsure if he would acknowledge her presence. "Those will be fine hunters," he said without looking, voice low, a softness, rare and unguarded, threading through the words. Vera met his gaze, catching a flicker of a smile that didn't quite reach the storm in his eyes. "They are stronger than most," she said. "They just need the right guidance." Kalen's eyes flicked to her with a spark of something almost like approval. "And you think you can give it?" She shrugged, the faint scar over her brow creasing with the motion. "Maybe, or maybe I can just keep them from breaking." Her breath hitched at the truth behind her words. The king nodded slowly, his gaze deepening in a way that made her pulse quicken. "Careful what you offer, Vera. Not all wounds can be mended with gentleness. But some can," she whispered, more to herself than to him. Their eyes locked in a fragile truce, the quiet understanding rippling between them. The day passed, and with it came the rumbling tension of war-sharpened blades, whispered strategies, the ever-present hum of unease that clung to the air like smoke. Inside the great hall of the fortress, the heavy scent of wood smoke and burnt cork mingled with anticipation. The long table where Kalen presided as Alpha King was spread with maps, tokens, and marked with the scars of past battles. The council gathered, faces grim and voices low. The tension was a living thing, snaking through the room like a predator waiting to strike. Vera sat in the corner, watching, the chill from the stone floor seeping into her bones, despite her layered clothing. Her lean fingers absently smoothed the edges of a worn cloak draped over her lap, a cloak belonging to Kalen himself, painstakingly prepared for the council's storm. Her eyes flicked to him, wary and watchful, as he sat like a mountain carved from ice and steel, his silver-streaked hair catching the flicker of torchlight. The jagged scar that marked his cheekbone held a silent history of pain and survival, and his piercing blue gaze burned with the weight of command. A sudden murmur silenced the hall as heavy footsteps echoed through the entrance. The door swung open, admitting an emissary from an enemy tribe, a man clad in dark leathers, eyes sharp and calculating, lips curled in a thin sneer. Kalen's muscles tensed, like coiled steel. The pack shifted, growls rumbling low in throats, fists clenched on the arms of chairs, eyes narrowing into blades of suspicion. The air thickened, a collective breath held on the cusp of violence. The emissary's voice was smooth, dripping with false civility. "Alpha Kalen, I come bearing an offer, a chance to avoid needless bloodshed." Kalen's power radiated outward like a storm held in check. "Speak then," he commanded, voice quiet but lethal. The room pulsed with energy, every heartbeat a hollow drum of impending conflict. And yet, amid the storm, Vera moved with quiet grace. She rose, the cloak in her hands brushing against the stone floor. Without a word, she approached Kalen, leaning just enough to draw the cloak over his broad shoulders. Her fingers adjusted the fabric, smoothing it, an unspoken gesture of allegiance that spoke louder than the emissary's threats. Kalen's eyes flicked to her briefly, a silent nod passing between them, a tether forged in unspoken trust. His beast, restless and primal, prowled near her side, but did not growl or snap. Instead, it pressed close, a protective shadow. The emissary's smile tightened, reading the room like a map of potential uprisings and fractured loyalties. "I see. Your kingdom is well guarded. Alpha, but how well are your guards guarded?" Vera's heart stuttered, not from fear, but from the weight of the moment. She met Kalen's gaze, her green eyes steady and unwavering. The unspoken promise in his was clear. Stay close, stay resilient. The War Council erupted in cautious dialogue, voices sharp as the edges of drawn blades, but lightened at intervals by Kalen's measured words. Vera remained quietly at his side, her presence a balm amid the tension. She handed him a cup of steaming spiced wine, their fingers brushing for a heartbeat, an electric charge passing silently between them. The beast growled low but approvingly, a sound that made Vera's pulse flare. It was a guardian sound, a warning and a protection. When the emissary finally departed, escorted with cool politeness that obscured the undercurrent of threat, the tension in the hall began to unravel slowly. The pack exhaled, but the weight of anticipation lingered like a storm cloud on the horizon. Kalen's gaze found Vera's once more as the room thinned. "You have a strange way of earning your place," he said, voice tight yet faintly laced with something like admiration. She shrugged, the faint scar over her brow catching the torchlight. "I didn't come here to make enemies, not when there's so much more at stake." He studied her, the jagged scar on his face suddenly seeming less a mark of battle and more a line etched by fate, one that perhaps matched the faint scar on hers. "The pack is shifting," Kalen admitted, voice low. "Because of you," Vera's breath hitched at the weight of the words. "Because of us," she corrected softly. It was a future neither had voiced aloud, but both silently hoped for, a fierce, fragile thing, born in the shadows of war and the quiet bravery of small kindnesses. In that moment, surrounded by cold stone and the echo of a beast's watchful growl, the fortress no longer felt like a cage to her. It was a crucible place where fractured souls might be tempered into something stronger. something alive, and she was no longer alone. Vera's fingers trembled as she traced the worn leather edges of the map spread before her. The ink faded, but the roots unmistakably deliberate. A sprawling web of emissaries, informants, and shadowed whispers that threaded through every corner of the neutral land. The flickering candlelight cast wavering shadows on the scroll, turning those roots into living tendrils, creeping and curling against the cracked stone beneath her fingertips. It was in the silence of the dead hour that Vera found the forbidden ledger, a cache of coded messages tucked inside the private study of a minor knight, someone assumed loyal but evidently blind to the rotting core he harbored. The letters, when deciphered, revealed a vast network of spies, their true allegiance tangled between rival factions, vying for war beneath the very roof of the Alpha King's fortress. But worst of all was the crushing realization, like a jagged dagger twisting in her chest, she had been the pawn, all along, meticulously placed and baited to act as catalyst for a catastrophe they intended to consume in the flames of battle. Cold swept over her skin as she folded herself into the shadows, the whispered secrets of betrayal invading every thought. They had deliberately set her up, her exile, her precarious position, the suspicious glances the pack had barely concealed, all orchestrated by enemies cloaked in loyalty, wielding her as the spark to ignite fury between kingdoms. The weight of that truth pressed down with unbearable force, twisting tight in her chest with anger, grief, and a bitter stab of humiliation. She hadn't just been cast out, she'd been handed over to death beneath a veil of lies and treachery. Vera rose slowly, the leather straps of her boots creaking quietly as she slipped from the room, clutching the evidence to her side like a shield. Every step back toward the heart of the fortress was a march in a silent war none could yet see. The corridors were deserted, shadows pooling like ink beneath her feet, every echo a reminder of the unseen eyes that might yet watch. Yet beneath that growing storm in her veins, there was an emboldening thread, a resolve weaving through the raw wound of betrayal. She wouldn't be the broken instrument in their hands. The encounter was not long delayed. Kaelin found her in the stillness near the western battlements, where the wind drew cold from the peaks beyond, scattering the remnants of autumn's leaves in swirling patterns around her boots. His silhouette emerged from the shadows as if he had been waiting, a dark shape carved against the pale light of dawn. The jagged scar stretched over his cheek, as always, like a map of battles endured, but now his eyes held silent storms, brimming with questions beneath their ice. "You're hiding something," he said, the words rough, low like a growl barely restrained. The weight of the ledger pressed against her hip beneath the loose folds of her tunic. She stepped closer into the light, the sharp scent of pine and stone mixing with the faint musk of the beast they both wore beneath skin and bone. "I'm not hiding anything from you," Vera said, voice steady, but the faint quiver of exhaustion flickered just beneath the surface, the kind born from the sleepless nights spent unraveling webs she hadn't known tangled her so tightly. Kaelin's eyes narrowed. His wolf paced just beneath his skin, muscles twitching, restless and coiled. "Don't lie to me. You've been slipping away, retreating in silence. You wear the same mask during council, during the hunt. Yet here, beneath it all." His gaze sharpened until it cut through the fragile calm she fought to maintain. "I've never seen you afraid, and now you do," she whispered, almost ashamed yet unyielding. "Because what I discovered, it changes everything." The wind threading cold fingers through his dark hair. Then the wolf emerged subtly. A low growl rumbled up his throat, a warning and an echo of pain locked deep in the cage of his chest. His guarded demeanor cracked, revealing not anger, but something far more volatile. Vulnerability buried beneath bulky armor. "What is it?" His voice was sharper now, edged like a blade. "Tell me, now." Vera swallowed, tasting the copper tang of fear mingled with fury. She pulled the ledger free, letting the brittle parchment flutter like a wounded bird in his grip. Kaylin's fingers brushed hers as he took it, and in that brief contact, the distance between them narrowed, the chill between them warmed by the silent plea beneath her eyes. She waited, her heart drumming a frantic rhythm in her ears. "The rival houses," she said, voice fierce despite the weight. "They've built an entire network inside this fortress spies, feeding both sides, using me as bait to ignite a war neither of us wants." Kaylin's lips pressed into a hard, thin line. His wolf circled beneath his skin, pacing visibly now, as if it wished to tear the fortress apart and hunt down every traitor by scent alone. But he shoved those instincts back beneath the surface, folding his emotions with tightly coiled restraint. "The council is fractured," he admitted, finally, "and I suspected disloyalty. But this, you," his gaze pinned her under its unyielding weight. For a heartbeat there was silence between them, cracked only by the distant howl of a lone sentinel wolf echoing across the rugged landscape. "I was set up," Vera said, voice barely above a breath, "by those who wanted war, wanted me to be the cause. And if I hadn't found this, everything would have exploded in blood and ashes." Kaylin's jaw clenched, hands flexing as though grappling with something unseen. His breath was ragged, the wolf's growls rising like the tide beneath his ribs. "Why didn't you come to me?" "Because I couldn't trust you," was the bitter answer, burning behind her eyes. But the words tangled in the thorns of pride and pain, never quite finding voice. I needed proof first. I couldn't risk being wrong." The moment stretched fragile and brittle between them, and then something in his expression softened, a flicker of something raw and human breaking through the hardened alpha exterior. "You carry this alone," Kaylin said quietly, voice cracked beneath the weight of his own confession. "Why?" Vera looked down. Poir, cold seeping deep into her bones. "Because I'm not sure anyone else would listen." His wolf let out a low, mournful growl, the sound vibrating through the stone beneath their feet. His gaze locked onto hers, sharp and unflinching. "I'm listening." The confession settled between them like smoke and fire, dangerous, volatile, yet undeniably drawing them closer. "You don't have to," she whispered, biting her lip at the unexpected surge of heat crawling up her spine. "Not if you don't want to." Kaylin's laugh was unexpected, a dry, bitter sound laced with something like relief. "You could have begged, lied, praised me enough to keep your place." He shook his head, the jagged scar flashing as he smiled. A flicker of genuine warmth in his eyes. "But you didn't. You're not like the others." "I'm not," Vera admitted, her voice steady, though her heart hammered wild and uncontrolled. "And I won't be anyone's pawn again. For the first time, and not just because of the midnight cold." Kaylin's wolf stilled, the restless pacing slowed as he glanced away into the fading horizon, narrowing the distance with deliberate ease, forcing him to meet her eyes. "And you're stubborn." No one had ever challenged him like this, not with such calm defiance, not without fear or hesitation. That was what made her dangerous, and perhaps what made her the only one who could stand beside him in the looming storm. "Reckless and stubborn," he repeated softly. "Maybe that's exactly what we need." Vera's heart fluttered, wild and fierce, in the hush between them. The fortress around them no longer felt like a prison, but a crucible, a furnace forging something unexpected and impervious. Kaylin shifted then, his wolf's low growl settling into a begrudging purr of kinship. His shoulders relaxed just enough to betray the tension writhing beneath the surface. "Tomorrow," he said, voice rough but steady, "we'll draw up the names, find the others. And this before it begins. And if we can't trust the council to stand with us," his eyes locked with hers, ice blue burning through shadow and doubt, "then we build something new." For the first time since her exile, Vera didn't feel like a castaway, a pawn or a weapon. In the warmth of his fierce gaze, amidst the whispered growls of his restless beast, she felt the fragile threads of trust weaving into something stronger, something that might just be unbreakable. They stood side by side, the dawn's light bleeding over the horizon and washing the fortress in gold. The war had been seeded in lies, but its roots would now face a storm, unlike any before, a storm born of quiet kindnesses, hard truth, and the unyielding strength of two fractured souls, bound by fate. And in that tenuous, breath-held moment, as the fortress stirred to life around them, Vera knew one thing with unshakable certainty. She was no longer alone. Not now, not ever. The fortress hummed with restless tension, its ancient stones holding whispered secrets that seemed to crawl beneath Vera's skin. When night fell, the world outside narrowed to shadows, brittle sounds, and the charged pulse of danger hovering unseen. Vera felt it, a tremor underfoot, a stirring in the darkness like an uncoiling thread ready to snap. But it wasn't just menace. There was an urgency that drew her out from the refuge of her sparse quarters and into the frost-brushed night, moving beneath a sprawl of stars like a ghost stitched to purpose. Her boots made no sound on the rough-hewn path as she followed the subtle shift in the air, the faint, ragged whine of pain, the low growl somewhere beyond the walls. The fortress gates were sealed tight, guards vigilant, but the beast moved within, wounded and wary, hidden where the light could not reach. She found it in a narrow shadow-veined alley, where the stones grew slick with sweat and something darker. The alpha wolf's massive form lay curled in agony, silver fur matted and torn beneath ragged breath. The beast's eyes, golden, feral, haunted, flicked open with a flare, pain and confusion swirling in molten amber depths. It saw her instantly, but did not snap or snarl. Instead, a flicker of something unspoken passed between them, recognition or perhaps a question. Vera knelt slowly, the ancient scar above her brow, a pale moon glowing in the night's hush. She felt the familiar stirring within, the quiet pulse of power that had first surfaced like a whispered secret, hidden even from herself. Her hand hovered momentarily over the ragged wound that marred the wolf's flank, swollen and raw from a savage, unseen attack. "Shh," she murmured, voice soft yet threaded with steel beneath. Her fingers grazed the fur, not touching, but almost willing healing through the fragile thread connecting flesh and spirit. The wolf's body tensed, trembling on the edge of panic, but the raw edges of pain began to dull like embers settling beneath ash. The beast's growl throbbed low and ragged, and then slowed, folding into a hesitant rumble that trembled with something almost like trust. Vera stayed in that narrow alley, breathing, mingling with the night air, the scent of rain-soaked earth and distant pine weaving around them. The wolf's tense muscles relaxed, bit by bit, beneath her tentative touch, and with each pulse of her hidden power, the shadows around seemed to still, as if the fortress itself had paused to watch. It was then she sensed the other presence, lurking just beyond the edge of the alley, watching. Kaelin. Not Kaelin, the ruthless Alpha King, draped in power and menace, but Kaelin in that rare, quiet moment between the fading of his beast's growl and the shadow of his endless vigilance, the man whose wolf lingered at her side, eyes keen and unblinking as though decoding some ancient mystery he hadn't dared face before. The ice-blue gaze that zeroed in on her was sharpened by an unfamiliar edge, a mixture of wariness and something else. Respect, curiosity, tenuous hope. She did not pull away, did not flinch. Letting the silence stretch, velvet and fragile between them, Vera met his eyes with steady calm. Though the wounded wolf looked to her with grateful reverence, it was Kaelin's beast that remained still, a ghost at the periphery, its presence a silent challenge and perhaps an acknowledgement of a power that unsettled them all. Kaelin's voice cut through the stillness, low and rough. "You're hiding more than you let on." His words were neither accusation nor praise, but a statement of fact, loaded with cautious fascination. Vera met him, halfway, unafraid. I'm tending wounds no one else notices. Sometimes, that's what it takes to survive, to heal. His gaze flicked back to the wolf, now breathing easier, pain subsiding beneath her steady hands, and then returned to her, lingering far longer than usual. You don't have to hide from me, he said, voice so quiet it almost got lost in the night. For once, she believed him. Asterisk. The next day dawned under a brittle sky, the kind that promised storms both in weather and fate. The fortress thrummed with unease. Whispers fluttered like restless moths. Everyone knew nothing. Stays buried for long, in a place ruled by shadows, and wolves alike. Vera's thoughts churned in a taut knot, every step echoing in the stone halls, where secrets bred like rats in dark corners. Kaelin's words, from the night before, played on loop, a fragile thread of hope knitting through the otherwise weighty dread. Yet, nothing could have prepared her for the betrayal, the knife that slid through the fragile veil of trust, slicing everything open, in a burst of chaos. It happened in the grand hall, where the council gathered to decide the fate of allies and enemies alike. Vera was close to the king, standing in the shadow of his broad frame, their closeness no longer a mask, but a shield. The murmurs had barely begun when a sharp, deadly blade flicked through the air, a flash of steel aimed not at a distant enemy, but directly at Kaelin. Time fractured. Vera's breath caught, heart pounding as the world slowed around, the spinning blade hurtling toward the Alpha King's chest. She moved before Thor could catch up, a primal roar unfurling from deep within her veins. Her hand shot out, catching the wrist of the assassin's trembling arm, twisting with fierce precision. The would-be killer's eyes met, hers wild, desperate, betrayed, and then the blade clattered to the stone floor. Kaelin's beast surged forward, nostrils flared and fur bristling, a terrifying presence, unleashed in warrior's defense. But Kaelin himself took a step forward, placing his massive hand over Vera's, steadying her with a grip that was equal parts command and protection. The council chamber fell silent, breaths caught in throats, the weight of the moment smashing through the veneer of politeness. Enough, Kaelin said, voice low, every word a weapon and a balm all at once. This ends here. Vera felt the flood of adrenaline bleed away, replaced by a deep, anchoring certainty. Side by side with Kaelin, she stood in the storm's eye, no longer an outsider or a secret, but a vital element of the kingdom's survival. Thatcher's, his ice-blue eyes locked onto hers, not as a king to a subject, but as a man who understood the shattering cost of betrayal. The walls between them, built of suspicion and fear, crumbled under the weight of raw, unguarded emotion. You saved me, he said, the fierce honesty in his voice breaking through layers of steel. And now, I won't let anything happen to you. His words burned into her chest like a promise and a vow. She saw it there, in the jagged scar tracing his cheek, in the storm smoke of his dark hair, and in the wolf shadow flickering behind his eyes, a ferocity born not just of power, but of fierce, undeniable need. Vera's heartbeat thundered in reply. I won't let you fight alone. The king's lips quirked in something close to a smile, sharp and rare like sunlight breaking through the ice. Then we fight as one. The fortress around them seemed to breathe with new life, its stones humming with ancient strength, its walls holding firm against the gathering storm. In that charged moment, amid shards of shattered trust and whispered violence, Vera understood the depth of what they faced. Not just enemies beyond the gates, but demons within their own walls. And standing beside Kaelin, her Alpha King, she found something fierce and fragile, intertwined, a sanctuary hard-forged in blood and steel, a bond born from the quiet courage to face every shadow together. It was more than survival. It was the beginning of something unbreakable. The air was cool beneath the ancient trees surrounding the fortress, an eternal witness to battles both known and hidden. Shadows stretched long in the slipping sunlight, painting the world in muted golds and greens. Vera found herself leaning against the rough bark of a towering oak, the pulse of its life, steady and deep, an anchoring force beneath her racing thoughts. Kalen stood close, his broad frame silhouetted against the fading light, the jagged scar along his cheekbone softened by the calm in his eyes. The wildness that had roared within him only hours before now rested a fierce ember, glowing beneath the surface. For a long moment they simply existed between the trees and the silence, the fortress behind them a distant hum, the weight of recent betrayals fading into something raw and real, but quieter. Vera inhaled deeply, each breath tasting of pine and earth, a contrast to the metallic tang of blood that still lingered in her mouth from the night's conflict. How strange it was that such violence could give birth to such fragile peace. "I never thought I'd find a moment like this here," Vera said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper, as if the forest itself might listen and carry her words, somewhere that could understand. Kalen's gaze dipped to meet hers, his ice-blue eyes softer now, less the sharp edge of command, and more an invitation to something neither had dared name before. "I didn't think I'd want anyone at my side," his voice was rough but steady. "Not after everything I lost. But you," he faltered, perhaps surprised by his own admission. "You've changed all that." The wind stirred her chestnut braid, and Vera pushed a stray lock behind her ear, the faint scar above her eyebrow pricking with memory. Despite the scars she carried, both visible and hidden beneath his gaze, she felt seen, not as a spy, not as a weapon, but as something more. "I thought I was just a means to an end," she confessed, her fingers tightening involuntarily on the rough bark behind her. Something to be discarded. The honesty poured out like shards of glass, sharp but cleansing. "But here, with you, it's starting to feel like, maybe I'm something else. Maybe I'm meant for more." His eyes darkened, a storm curling beneath that calm surface, but there was no threat in his expression. Instead, there was an undeniable tenderness, as if he recognized the fragile bravery it took to say those words aloud. "You are," he said simply, voice low, almost reverent, "more than I ever imagined. Not just a protector of these lands, but of me, of what we are building together." The weight of that was almost too much to bear. This slow-burning connection forged from pain and survival, something that warmed her in the face of relentless cold. Vera's heart trembled with the first sparks of trust, of belonging, fragile and starry. "Then we learned to walk this path side by side," Vera whispered, reaching out, her fingertips brushing the rough skin of his forearm. The contact was electric, though tentative, forging a silent promise that neither was yet ready to speak aloud. Deep Kalen's wolf shadow flickered in his eyes, a quiet acknowledgement in his steady, unwavering grip when he covered her hand with his own. The beast in him, once, a tempest just beneath the surface, now balanced in a delicate truce with the woman who had broken down walls with nothing more than quiet kindness and fierce courage. In that gift, they both found something nearly sacred: sanctuary. Night crept closer, stars beginning to peek through the canopy overhead. The fortress behind them breathed with ancient strength, yet it was here, in this quiet place, beneath the vigilant ancient trees, that Vera felt the first true stirrings of home. Not the uneasy refuge of a spy forced to hide, but the hard-won peace of a chosen mate, standing shoulder to shoulder with a king. From the depth of calm, an unspoken understanding blossomed, slow and deliberate. They would face the coming storm as one, not merely as two survivors, but as something stronger, bound by trust and tempered by fire. But amidst this fragile hope, the ache in Vera's chest twisted anew. She had pushed the shadows of her past deep into the recesses of her mind, buried the pain of betrayal so long as it did not distract from survival. Now, however, the past clawed its way toward the present, with jagged, undeniable force. The news struck like an icy spear. She had been summoned discreetly to the council chambers by one of Kaelin's closest allies, the wise and stoic Alaric, a man whose calm often carried the weight needed to temper the Alpha King's storm. His expression was grave, voice tight with unsaid fears. "She's your brother," Alaric said, the words slow and deliberate, as if testing the ground. "The conspiracy traces back to him." Vera's breath caught. The world narrowed until the only sound was the pounding of her own blood in her ears. Her brother, the man she might once have trusted with her life, the blood tie she had not dared to truly believe, had turned against her, had become a pawn, perhaps even a puppet master, of the enemy. Years of distance, silence, and bitterness crashed down in a tidal wave of disbelief and raw grief. Memories of boyhood laughter twisted into the bitter ache of family, fractured beyond repair. How thin the line between love and betrayal, how cruel the irony that the one she had hoped to protect was part of the venom threatening this realm, threatening Kaelin, threatening the fragile sanctuary they had begun to build together. Kaelin stood behind her, silent, but unmistakably present, his beast, calm, but coiled, in readiness, his alertness sharpening the air around them. His hand brushed the hilt of his blade, a silent shield offered without need for words. Vera's green eyes flashed with hurt and resolve. "Why?" she breathed. "Why would he?" Alaric shook his head, his jaw tight. "Power, fear, hatred's older than any of us. He plays a dangerous game, one that could undo everything the Alpha King has fought for. And here I thought I left the past behind," Vera muttered bitterly, fists clenched at her sides as the weight of betrayal settled deep in her bones. Kaelin's hand found hers again, firm and grounding. "You haven't," he said softly, voice a promise of fire and ice. "But you're not alone." Vera's breath trembled, not from weakness, but from the fierce clarity settling over her like armor. Her loyalties, once torn like a ragged banner between kin and cause, now found their true home beside the Alpha King, in the pack his strength commanded, and the fragile peace she had fought so hard to grasp. Her brother's treachery was a blade thrust deep into her heart, yes, but it was also the crucible that tempered her resolve. She was no longer the lost girl cast out by false accusations. She was a protector, forged in battle, a mate, chosen by destiny and desire, and a warrior standing shoulder to shoulder with the man who carried a kingdom on his broad shoulders. The pack members gathered quietly around the fortress, as word spread of the threat within. No clamor rose, no rash words were spoken, only the weighty acceptance of the danger and the unyielding vow to stand fast. Kaelin's beast watched silent, muscles taut beneath his skin, eyes never leaving the horizon. Amid the solemn strength of his pack, Vera found unexpected comfort in their quiet solidarity. They were not just soldiers or subjects. They were a family bound by blood and battle, by fierce protection and unspoken loyalty. Here, she was no longer a lonely exile. Here, she was one of them. In that charged stillness, where trust was fragile as spun glass, yet as strong as steel, Vera clenched Kaelin's hand, feeling the steady heartbeat beneath her palm and the weight of all that was to come. Her voice was steady, though her heart hammered with the enormity of the choice she had made. "No matter what he's done, I choose you. The pack, this land, our future." Kaelin's eyes shone with a fire that was both challenge and invitation. "Then we face it together, every lie, every shadow. Nothing will break us." The ancient trees stood witness once more, their gnarled limbs cradling the vow born of broken pasts and fierce hope, and as night deepened, the fortress doors closed tight against the gathering storm. In the midst of betrayal and war, Vera understood one undeniable truth. Here, beneath stars old as time itself, she was finally home. The dawn light filtered through the dense canopy of ancient oaks, dappling the stone courtyard with shifting patches of gold and green. A subtle breeze wove through the leaves, carrying the faint scent of wild herbs, and moss-earthy, alive, and steady. Vera stood amid the gathering of rival clans and factions, her sharp green eyes sweeping across the sea of hard faces, each set with suspicion, pride, and the invisible scars of too many battles fought alone. The air thrummed with tension, a brittle harmony waiting to snap if touched the wrong way. But beneath the raw edges was something newer, fragile, like the first ice of winter. Something that Vera was determined to nurture. The council had been called here, within the heart of the neutral territory, the center of Kaelin's domain. Shatter had spread not by whisper, but by the heavy, cautious steps of emissaries and messengers, news of an alpha, willing to entertain a council beyond his war-hardened circle. Vera had argued for this day even before she had dared to believe she belonged here. To broker peace meant risking everything, her safety, her hard-won trust, the precarious balance Kaelin's fractured kingdom teetered upon. Yet now, standing beneath the long shadows of towering stone battlements and sharpened spears, she felt the steady pulse of possibility. Her voice came clear and firm as the murmurs rippled back into silence. We are not enemies here. We are survivors, bound by the land itself, by the storms that break us, and the earth where we bury our dead alike. There can be no future if we remain fractured, each clawing for scraps of power, while the danger from without whispers closer, hungrier every day. A gruff murmur passed along the ranks, eyes narrowing in skepticism. One burly man, his face a map of old wounds and hard winters, stepped forward. And why should we trust the Alpha King's outsider? What proof do we have she's not a spy still lurking? Vera's gaze met his without falter. Because I am here, with you, she said quietly, her fingers curling into fists at her sides. Because I was sent as one thing, but I am something else. I am someone who has seen the cost of betrayal, and yet I choose to stand here, open and unarmed, if only to offer a hand, not a knife. Trust is forged in acts, not words. The murmurs stirred again, some nods creeping into the crowd. Not all, but enough. Respect was a currency as valuable and rare as gold in these fractured lands, a treasure Vera was learning to wield with every measured word. At her side, Kaelin stood quietly, his presence a grounding force. His broad frame was relaxed, the usual rigid alertness softened, as though the beast curled beside her, a massive shadow of midnight fur and amber eyes, breathed reassurance into the air. No growls, no flashing claws, just the steady rhythmic rise and fall of powerful muscles under taut skin. He glanced toward Vera once. Something unspoken passed between them, a silent alliance heavier than any pact voiced aloud. Finally, the oldest seer among the gathered elders, a wiry woman with eyes like polished bone, spoke. We have fought long enough with blades drawn against one another. The threat beyond our borders will not wait for us to settle vendettas. If this Alpha King and his mate can offer us shelter and unity, then perhaps the old ways must bend for our children's sake. Vera felt a quiet swell of triumph. It was not victory, not yet, but an opening, a door, creaking ajar to light where shadows clung stubbornly still. She nodded, stepping closer to Kaelin. We will build together. We will watch each other's backs when the night grows cold and the wolves howl for blood. No more isolation, no more suspicion, only strength born of alliance. Kaelin's voice came low, gravel thick, but with warmth lacing through the edges, like molten steel cooling to tempered iron. And if any of you break that trust, if any bring the pack harm, you will answer to me. His eyes glinted briefly with that familiar warning, but when he looked at Vera, the hard edge vanished completely. But that will not happen. Not while she stands here. The gathering shifted, the tension easing like a taut bowstring finally released. Below the surface of cautious hope, Vera felt the power humming through her veins, not of bloodline or brute force, but something quieter and more potent, influence earned through vulnerability and the courage to stand unshielded. This was her realm as much as Kaelin's a realm, built on fragile bridges, on promises whispered in the dark where every step could either build or destroy. As the sun climbed higher, the council dispersed, the factions retreating to their corners of the neutral land, their voices carrying tentative plans for trade, joint patrols, and shared watchfires. Vera remained a moment longer, eyes meeting Kaelin's. His beast stirred, rising to its feet, a low rumble vibrating like distant thunder from its throat. But instead of threatening, it padded forward and settled beside her, once more, a solid weight of loyalty and protection that filled her with a fierce, aching comfort. "You did well," Kaelin said softly, almost a whisper, meant only for her. She allowed herself a small, tired smile. "We did well. You were silent, but unwavering." Her hand found his, squeezing gently against the steel beneath his skin. He gave the faintest nod, and together they watched as the neutral land, long fractured by suspicion and past wounds, took its first shaky steps toward unity under the watchful, silent eyes of the Alpha King's beast. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. Vera found herself wandering near the training grounds at dusk, where fallen leaves carpeted the earth with russet and gold. The scent of pine and damp soil mingled with the faint metallic tang of sharpened blades. From the corner of her eye she spotted movement, a small figure weeping quietly beneath a brooding spruce. It was a wolf pup, a mere fragment of life, its fur matted and dull, one leg awkwardly bent at an unnatural angle. Despite the hardened world around them, the pup's suffering tugged at something deep within Vera. Her instincts surged forward, healer, protector, nurturer. Without hesitation, she knelt beside the trembling creature. Kaelin emerged from the shadows without sound, his ice blue eyes softening as he regarded the tiny injured animal. His beast mirrored his expression, eyes wide and cautious, sensing the shift in the Alpha's demeanor. "This one's hurt badly," Vera murmured, fingertips tracing swollen joints with careful precision. "If left too long, it'll never run." Kaelin crouched, the scarred side of his face catching fading light, vulnerability threading through his usual storm. "You've softened me more than I ever expected," he said, a rueful half-smile tugging at his lips. She glanced up at him, eyes bright with unspoken challenge. "I didn't come here to be a hardened ghost. Neither did you." Together they worked in tandem. Vera's healing hands gentle yet sure, Kaelin's steady presence shielding from distractions and dangers alike. The pup whimpered softly, nostrils flaring, trusting the warmth radiating between them. Vera's thoughts swirled with the intimate rhythm of the moment. Here, stripped of protocol and power struggles, the walls Kaelin had built around himself showed their first cracks. His jaw unclenched, eyes quieting as if letting down a guarded gate, long sealed. "Why do you let me near?" Kaelin asked in a low voice as he helped position splints. "Few do," she met his gaze steadily. "Because I see the man beneath the crown and the beast. Because I know what it means. To be alone, broken, and to still choose to heal." Her words lingered between them, a bridge over years of solitude and pain. The Alpha King's usual cold dominance softened, tempered now by a fierce protectiveness, not just over the pack, but over her. The beast beside them shifted, inching closer with a vulnerability that mirrored Kaelin's own. The air around the training grounds grew still, charged with a quiet understanding. The pack, sensing something new blossoming, watched from the periphery, a subtle acceptance like a tide, slowly changing course. Kaelin's voice broke the silence again, softer this time, almost uncertain. "Vera, when this is done, will you stay? Not out of duty or necessity, but because you want to." Her heart quickened, the raw honesty in his question pulling at her defenses. "I'm already home," she whispered, fingers tracing the pup's fragile frame one last time before meeting his gaze with unwavering conviction. "And I'm not leaving." She saw the weight of years lighten in his eyes, the fierce lonely king, finding a tether in the woman who had dared to step into his world with nothing but hope and healing hands. The pack felt it too, a turning point etched in quiet moments, in shared tenderness beneath the failing light. As night closed in and the first stars pricked the deep velvet of sky, Kaelin's beast settled at Vera's feet, a living symbol of peace and protection. Nothing was certain, not yet war and betrayal, still cast long shadows. But here, in the fragile calm after battle, a kingdom began to be reborn with silent strength and fierce, unyielding love. Together they rose, shoulders brushing, their gazes locked toward a future neither had dared to believe could be theirs. The Alpha King's cold walls had begun to crumble, and in the rising hope of healing hands and fierce hearts, they found strength neither had known before. For the first time in a long while, Vera understood. True power lay not in dominion or fear, but in the courage to trust, to be vulnerable, and to choose one another, against every shadow, beneath stars old as time itself. The air was thick with tension, the heavy scent of burning wood and iron mingling with the sharp bite of winter's approach. Kaelin had never been more vulnerable, never without the shield of ferocity that danced beneath his calm exterior. But now, as he staggered back from the ornate wooden table in his private chambers, clutching his throat and gasping for air, Vera's hidden power surged to the surface with an undeniable force. His eyes, fierce and icy, just moments before, blurred with panic, then darkened as the primal beast within roared beneath his skin, desperate to control the searing poison unraveling his veins. Vera's breath hitched, her sharp green eyes alight with something she hadn't fully understood until that moment, something raw, ancient, and fierce. She knew then without doubt that the bond tethering her to Kaelin was far beyond what she'd imagined. It was something destined, embedded deep within their very souls. Kaelin. Vera's voice broke through the chaos of his mind, steady and sure as she knelt beside him. Her hands brushed against the jagged scar along his cheekbone, the touch both tender and commanding. Under her palm, the beast, the fierce, uncontrollable force he had struggled for decades to command, sighed softly, simmering into stillness as if soothed by some unspoken promise. The poison burned like wildfire, a betrayal wrapped in silk and hidden venom, and yet her touch, cool and sure as the water of a mountain spring, pulsed warmth and life back into his faltering heartbeat. She placed her palms flat against his chest, steadying him with a power that coiled beneath the surface, unseen but undeniable. "Shh," she murmured, voice threading through the ragged edge of his pain. "You're not alone. I'm here. You're safe." His body trembled. The beast's low growl rumbled, not with anger, but with something new. A trust, fragile, yet immense. His fingers twitched, weakly clutching hers as a spark ignited between them. The raw, ruthless Alpha King she had admired and feared folded away, replaced by a man who dared to be vulnerable in her presence. For the first time, his fierce protection softened into something tender, a tentative care that brushed against her soul like the very first touch of dawn. In that crucible of pain and healing, Vera glimpsed the truth of their bond, not simply as alpha and mate, but as two halves of a whole, entwined by destiny and unspoken promises. She could feel the weight of his life in her hands, the fragility beneath the armor he'd worn for so long. Their futures hinged on this moment, fragile and irrevocable. When finally the poison ebbed from his system, Kaelin's breath smoothing into measured cadence, his ice-blue eyes found hers with an intensity that stole the very air from the room. "You saved me," he whispered, voice rough with awe and something deeper reverence. "No one else could." Vera replied, steady, her heart pounding a fierce rhythm alongside his. The beast rested calm at her feet, the silent witness to the sacred tether weaving tighter between them. But peace was an illusion, soon shattered. Beyond the walls of the citadel, The fragile calm of the neutral lands fractured beneath the weight of encroaching threats. Board came like a storm's advance, enemies mobilizing along the borders, shadowed figures moving like ghosts through the wilderness, challenging the fragile truce Kaelin had fought so hard to uphold. Their weapons were whispers, shattered alliances, and poison knife-edged lies, intended to fracture a kingdom, already bruised from betrayal. But Kaelin and Vera would not falter. Not now. They stood side by side in the strategy room, maps spread before them like battle scars waiting to be understood. Fingers traced the jagged lines dividing territories, their shared gaze a silent communication forged through hardship. "We can't face them blade to blade," Kaelin said, voice low but resolute. "They're trying to draw us into bloodshed that benefits only the puppet masters pulling strings beyond our sight." Vera nodded, her sharp mind racing through every possibility. "We fight with what they don't expect, our unity, our strategy. I've seen their movements, their weaknesses. We can turn their own shadows against them." Her words settled over the room like a cloak, the pack leaders leaning in to grasp the fragile hope she offered. In their unity lay their strength. Night after night they planned, their trust growing in the silent spaces between words. Kaelin's fierce protection evolved into something softer, a tentative care that made his broad shoulders seem less of an impenetrable wall and more of a sanctuary. Each time their hands brushed as they pored over maps, Vera felt the stubborn walls inside her fall away, brick by brick. "It's been a long time since I trusted anyone like this," Kaelin admitted softly, eyes meeting hers over a sea of parchment. "Not just with my secrets, but with my war." The quiet command, threading through the tension. "We're stronger together, Kaelin. Your pack, my will. They'll bend, but never break." As the first tendrils of dawn brushed the horizon, they rose, the slow burning ember of their bond steady against the rising chaos. The final confrontation burst forth like a wildfire cutting through dry grass. They found themselves face to face with the true villains, the puppet masters who had orchestrated the war from darkened halls, cloaked in lies and greed. The betrayal stung sharper than any blade, allies revealed as traitors, shadows shifting allegiance in the dark. Kaelin's hand found Vera's, their fingers intertwining with a fierce grip held only by those who have fought and survived together. The pack stood behind them, a living wall of loyalty and strength. There would be no breaking this line. "Are you ready for this?" Vera asked, voice steady but laced with something softer, a balm against the storm gathering at their backs. He inclined his head, fierce determination lighting his icy gaze. "With you, always." The fight was not merely for territory or power, it was for truth, for justice, for the chance to repair a kingdom ripped apart by deceit. With every stride forward, Vera's sharp mind and Kaelin's unyielding strength wove seamless tactics that turned their enemies' own strategies against them. But it was their mutual respect, the unspoken love that had simmered beneath years of hardship, which proved the mightiest weapon. The enemy could not counter a bond forged in fire and healed with trust. In the blaze of battle's aftermath, as the last traitor fell and silence reclaimed the land, Kaelin revealed the truth. He had kept close his choice, his declaration, as ancient and binding as the very earth beneath them. Underneath the canopy of ancient oaks, their beasts lying silent and at ease nearby, Kaelin took Vera's hands in his own, his voice a low vow wrapped in fragile hope. "You are mine, Vera, not because the crown demands it, but because I choose you. Mates, queen of these lands by my side," her breath caught, green eyes shimmering with unshed tears. The years of exile, pain, and betrayal melted away as she stepped into the future made of promises and sacred fire. "I choose you too," she whispered, the words a kiss upon the winter air. The creatures guarding their souls shifted closer, a living testament to the unity now sealed, not only between king and mate, but between the packs, past hurt and future hope. Together, Beneath the sprawling branches that had witnessed centuries of war and peace, they began their new reign, a reign not of iron and fear, but of healing hands and fierce hearts, where love was the strongest power of all. Vera let herself believe at last, in the strength that came from surrendering, in the quiet truth that home was no longer a place, but a person. And in that surrender, the Alpha King and his queen found the peace to face whatever storms yet lay ahead.